My name is Steve Spielberg, and I just directed a movie called Jaws.
When the director behind E.T., Jaws, and Schindler's List calls you one of his favorite actors, you know you've left a mark on cinema history.
He's a wonderful actor, by the way. He's a very, very good actor.
Steven Spielberg isn't just any filmmaker. He's a storyteller who helped define modern Hollywood.
It takes time, but, my movies, I think I spend maybe 2.5 years per film.
Over 5 decades, he's worked with hundreds of actors, but only a select few earned his highest praise or repeated collaborations.
That's a very good question. I like that. You've answered the question.
In this video, we're diving into 10 actors Spielberg didn't just direct. He admired, trusted, and in some cases, called the best of their generation. From childhood discoveries to Oscar-winning legends, let's explore the rare circle of performers who truly earned the Spielberg seal of approval. Tom Hanks, the everyman who became Spielberg's compass.
A supreme labor of love that we end up sharing with an awful lot of other people.
In a career filled with war heroes, outlaws, aliens, and dreamers, Tom Hanks stands out not for playing the loudest characters, but for playing the truest. When Steven Spielberg first cast Hanks in Saving Private Ryan, he wasn't just hiring a bankable star. He was choosing a man who could hold the weight of silence, carry a nation's sorrow in his eyes, and make audiences believe in honor without ever needing to raise his voice. That role as Captain Miller didn't just earn critical acclaim. It marked the beginning of one of modern cinema's most trusted collaborations. Spielberg once called Hanks the everyman of our time, and it's easy to see why. There's a kind of quiet authority in Hanks' performances that Spielberg gravitates toward, the sense that beneath the surface of an ordinary man lies extraordinary depth. This connection became even more evident in films like Catch Me If You Can, where Hanks plays the tireless FBI agent chasing DiCaprio's con artist with a blend of persistence and reluctant admiration, and in The Terminal, where his portrayal of a stranded immigrant turns bureaucracy into ballet. But their relationship goes beyond the screen. Spielberg doesn't just direct Hanks, he listens to him. The two have developed a shorthand that only time and mutual respect can build. Spielberg once said that working with Tom Hanks is like coming home. There's no ego, no mystery, just a shared belief in storytelling that puts the human spirit at the center. Together, they've become a cinematic compass, navigating history, morality, and the fragile courage of ordinary people caught in extraordinary times. Whether it's through the trenches of World War II or the marble halls of Washington, Spielberg uses Hanks not as a mouthpiece, but as a mirror, reflecting who we are and who we might hope to be. And for Spielberg, that kind of actor, reliable, human, and profoundly honest, isn't just rare. It's irreplaceable. Harrison Ford, the reluctant hero who became immortal.
I owe Harrison a great personal debt. And thank you, Harrison, because had you not approved her, I cannot imagine what my life would be like today.
Before the hat, before the whip, before the fedora became a silhouette burned into pop culture's memory, Harrison Ford was a carpenter. Not metaphorically. Literally. He built walls, hung doors, and fixed cabinets. Spielberg saw something in that, a man who didn't chase the spotlight, but embodied the grit of someone who could bear its weight. When Raiders of the Lost Ark was taking shape, Spielberg and George Lucas knew they needed more than a leading man. They needed a myth. And that's where Harrison Ford became Indiana Jones, not just a character, but a cinematic legend. What's remarkable is how much Spielberg trusted Ford with being human, even in a world of ancient curses, snake pits, and collapsing temples. Ford wasn't flashy. He didn't play Indy as a superhero. He played him as a man who got hurt, bled, limped, laughed at himself, and kept going. Spielberg understood that Ford's strength didn't lie in perfection, but in presence. In how he made the unbelievable feel grounded, how he could dodge a boulder and still seem like someone you might meet at a gas station. Their partnership went beyond action. Spielberg once said that Ford brought an edge of truth to everything he did. You see that in The Last Crusade, where the dynamic between Ford's Indy and Sean Connery's stoic father crackles with emotional honesty. Spielberg, a filmmaker who often explores the gravity of father-son relationships, found in Ford an actor who could express decades of love and resentment with just a glance. Behind the scenes, Ford wasn't one for grand speeches or deep rehearsals. He was instinctive, intuitive. Spielberg thrived on that energy, the quiet confidence of an actor who knew the moment mattered more than the method. Harrison Ford may never have set out to be anyone's favorite. But to Spielberg, he was the embodiment of old-school adventure, modern vulnerability, and storytelling at its purest. Together, they didn't just make blockbusters, they carved icons out of shadows. Leonardo DiCaprio, the chameleon Spielberg couldn't catch.
Comedy of this amazing scam impresario played by Leonardo DiCaprio, you know.
When Spielberg first watched Leonardo DiCaprio on screen, he didn't just see an actor, he saw lightning. Unpredictable, electric, uncontainable. DiCaprio had already carved a place in Hollywood with his raw intensity and unnerving authenticity. But in Catch Me If You Can, Spielberg gave him a playground, and Leo ran wild. At first glance, Catch Me If You Can seems like a cat and mouse chase between a con artist and an FBI agent. But under Spielberg's direction, and through DiCaprio's eyes, it becomes something more, a portrait of desperation wrapped in charm. Frank Abagnale Jr. isn't just faking identities, he's trying to outrun emptiness, crafting personas to cover the holes left behind by a fractured family. Spielberg understood this. And DiCaprio didn't just play it, he lived it. Every grin hides a plea. Every forged check, a cry for connection. What fascinated Spielberg was DiCaprio's duality. He could play innocent and dangerous in the same breath. Youthful but world-weary. Smooth but perpetually on the verge of collapse. Spielberg once said working with Leo was like watching a great jazz musician riff in real time, unpredictable, yet always in control. Their set was a dance, a trust exercise between a director who loves precision and an actor who thrives in chaos. Yet, despite that success, they've only collaborated once. Not due to tension, but because both artists are constantly in motion. Spielberg often revisits actors he considers spiritual mirrors, reliable, grounding forces. DiCaprio, in contrast, is the storm. Ever-shifting, every role a reinvention. In many ways, Catch Me If You Can was their perfect intersection, the grounded filmmaker and the untethered actor, meeting for one unforgettable ride. Though Spielberg hasn't directed DiCaprio again yet, their brief partnership left a lasting mark. One film, one performance, and 1,000 layers. Sometimes, the brightest flames burn the shortest. But even years later, Spielberg has never stopped praising DiCaprio as one of the most gifted actors of his generation, a master of masks who somehow tells the truth every time. Mark Rylance, the quiet voice that echoed loudest.
When I was working with Mark, the first day on Bridge of Spies, he was so not Mark Rylance. He so became Rudolph Abel. There's nothing he cannot do.
In a world obsessed with volume, bigger explosions, louder emotions, showy monologues, Mark Rylance whispers. And somehow, the world leans in. When Steven Spielberg first saw Rylance perform on stage, he saw something rare. An actor who didn't command attention, but earned it. Quietly, deliberately, as if every word had been weighed in his soul before it left his mouth. Their first collaboration, Bridge of Spies, was never meant to be a battlefield spectacle. It was a war of words, of dignity. And in the middle of it stood Rylance, as Rudolph Abel, a man accused of espionage who remains hauntingly calm in the face of chaos. Spielberg called Rylance's performance a masterclass in understatement. Where most actors might push, Rylance pulls you in, not with force, but with gravity. He doesn't perform, he reveals. What's fascinating is how Rylance reshaped Spielberg's storytelling rhythm. After decades of directing powerhouse leads and fast-talking charmers, Spielberg found in Rylance a completely different tempo. Slow, thoughtful, even peculiar. And that slowness wasn't hesitation. It was precision. In the BFG, Spielberg gave Rylance a full CGI body and a made-up language, and yet the emotional anchor was entirely human. Somehow, behind the digital wizardry, Rylance's soul still reached through. Every stumble, every odd phrase, every glance, it all felt real. Spielberg has said that working with Rylance changed how he thought about performance. It reminded him that strength can be quiet. That power doesn't always roar, sometimes it listens. Sometimes it simply waits. Unlike many of Spielberg's favorites, Rylance didn't come from blockbuster fame or Hollywood buzz. He came from Shakespeare, from black box theaters, from a life spent honing craft rather than chasing spotlight. And perhaps that's what Spielberg loved most, not just the talent, but the integrity behind it. In an age of noise, Mark Rylance was a whisper that could shake the room. And Spielberg, ever the listener, knew that voice was one worth capturing, again and again. Liam Neeson, the man Spielberg entrusted with memory.
My first conversation with Steven, if I don't get this part, it doesn't matter. I've just spent 3/4 of an hour with one of the great directors in the world.
There are performances that entertain, and there are performances that stay. Liam Neeson gave Steven Spielberg the latter. When the director set out to tell one of the most delicate and profound stories of his career, Schindler's List, he needed more than just a leading man. He needed someone who could carry the weight of history without drowning in it. Someone whose presence could hold sorrow, dignity, guilt, and grace all at once. He found that in Neeson. Before Schindler's List, Neeson was respected, but still outside the mainstream of household name actors. Spielberg, however, saw something deeper. Not just talent, gravitas. A quiet kind of strength that didn't beg for attention, but drew it naturally. As Oscar Schindler, Neeson didn't just portray a man, he embodied a transformation. From opportunist to reluctant protector, from bystander to someone who could no longer look away. And through every frame, Spielberg trusted him with the impossible, to humanize a story too large for words. Neeson's performance is filled with paradox. He plays a man flawed, vain, sometimes cowardly, and yet entirely human. Spielberg doesn't direct him like a hero. He doesn't need to. The power is in the silence, the doubt, the aching realization that redemption isn't something grand. It's often small, painful, and unfinished. In interviews, Spielberg has spoken of how Neeson understood the role instinctively, needing very little guidance. That trust, rare between director and actor, especially on such sensitive material, speaks volumes. Spielberg wasn't just casting a character. He was placing memory in someone's hands. Memory not as history book facts, but as emotion, as trauma, as endurance. And Neeson carried it with reverence. They haven't worked together again in a major film. But they didn't need to. Schindler's List wasn't a collaboration to be repeated. It was one to be remembered. In Liam Neeson, Spielberg found not just an actor, but a vessel. Someone who could hold the weight of a million untold stories and leave a space for us to feel them too. Richard Dreyfuss, the spark that lit Spielberg's fire. Before the world knew what a blockbuster was, before the word Spielbergian even existed, there was Richard Dreyfuss, the motor-mouthed, fast-thinking firecracker who helped ignite the early magic of Spielberg's career. Their chemistry didn't just work, it defined a cinematic era. When Spielberg cast Dreyfuss in Jaws, it wasn't because he fit the mold of a traditional leading man. He didn't. Dreyfuss was sharp, quirky, intellectually electric. And Spielberg loved him for it. As Matt Hooper, the oceanographer with just the right mix of arrogance and charm, Dreyfuss didn't simply play a role, he energized the entire film. In a movie about an unseen terror beneath the waves, he gave the audience someone real to hold on to. Funny, flawed, relatable. But it was close encounters of the third kind that solidified their bond and their legacy. Spielberg didn't want a hero in that film. He wanted obsession, curiosity, a man drawn to something he couldn't explain, at the cost of everything he thought he understood. Dreyfuss didn't just deliver, he embodied it. Roy Neary's descent into the unknown isn't told through exposition or dramatic turns. It's told through a forkful of mashed potatoes, a distant look at the stars, a slow unraveling that never feels forced. Spielberg trusted Dreyfuss with his own questions about purpose, wonder, and the pull of something greater. And Dreyfuss gave those questions a face. There was tension between them at times, creative pushback, ego, moments where the fire sparked too hot. But that's what made their work sing. Spielberg was still forming his voice, and Dreyfuss was the perfect instrument for its early notes. Passionate, unpredictable, endlessly human. Spielberg has said that without Dreyfuss, those early films wouldn't have had the same soul. He was more than a collaborator, he was a catalyst. And while their paths eventually diverged, the spark they struck together still glows in the DNA of modern cinema. Before there were dinosaurs, before there were aliens, before the world knew what Spielberg was capable of, there was Dreyfuss, giving that vision its first heartbeat. Daniel Day-Lewis, the ghost Spielberg, followed into greatness. There are actors you hire, and then there are actors you pursue. For Steven Spielberg, Daniel Day-Lewis was the latter. An elusive figure, rarely seen on screen, even more rarely seen repeating himself. A man who didn't take roles, but became them, to the point that he often disappeared completely from public view. So when Spielberg decided to make Lincoln, the most intimate portrait of America's most iconic president, he didn't want an impersonation. He wanted to capture a presence that felt inevitable, unshakable, like time folding in on itself. There was only one actor who could do that. But Day-Lewis initially said no. Spielberg waited. And waited. He sent letters, made calls, shared drafts. Still, Day-Lewis declined. Not out of arrogance, but because he understood the weight of a role. He needed to be sure he could honor it. Months passed before he finally agreed, and when he did, he didn't walk onto set. He emerged as Lincoln, fully formed, with the quiet dignity and aching melancholy of a man who bore the soul of a fractured nation. Spielberg has worked with many actors who inspired him, but Day-Lewis, he admitted, humbled him. On set, the director didn't feel like he was watching a performance. He felt like he was observing history. Day-Lewis wasn't acting, he was conjuring. His Lincoln wasn't the booming figure of monuments or speeches. He was delicate, deliberate, slightly stooped, a man full of sorrow and silence, wrestling with impossible decisions under the weight of a weary heart. Spielberg gave Day-Lewis the space to work like sculptor, carefully, obsessively, sometimes painfully. In return, Day-Lewis gave Spielberg not just a great performance, but a kind of reverence, as if the camera were lucky to be there at all. When Lincoln was released, critics called it a masterpiece. But Spielberg never spoke about its awards or box office first. He always returned to one thing: gratitude, that Day-Lewis said yes, that he trusted him, that he allowed himself to vanish, one last time, into greatness. And then, just like that, he walked away. No curtain call, no encore, just the quiet echo of something sacred captured on film. Whoopi Goldberg, the comedian who revealed a deeper truth. Before The Color Purple, the world knew Whoopi Goldberg as a rising star in comedy, sharp, fearless, magnetic. Her one-woman Broadway show had caught fire, blending humor with piercing social commentary. She was bold, brash, and undeniably original. But Steven Spielberg saw something beneath the laughter, something quieter, deeper, a sadness hiding just behind the punchlines. And in that, he saw not a comedian, but a revelation. When casting the lead for The Color Purple, Spielberg wasn't looking for fame. He was looking for a soul. The role of Celie required more than acting, it required surrender. Vulnerability, the kind of emotional honesty that couldn't be taught or faked. Against all expectations and industry advice, Spielberg cast Goldberg, an unproven actress in Hollywood, to carry the weight of a sprawling, generational epic. She didn't just rise to the moment, she transformed it. Goldberg's performance as Celie is a slow burn, restrained, almost silent at first. But in her eyes, something trembles. A spark, a memory, a quiet strength pushing against decades of pain. Spielberg, known for spectacle, stripped everything away here. He let the camera linger on her face. Let the silence speak. Let Whoopi do what only she could, make us feel the things too deep for dialogue. The collaboration was intimate. Spielberg guided with care, knowing he was directing something more than a film. He was directing a story that belonged to many. Whoopi, in turn, gave him her trust. She brought to Celie not just performance but presence, the weight of every woman who had ever been unseen, unheard, and finally found her voice. The industry didn't know what to do with it at first, but time did. The performance, once seen as unexpected, is now considered iconic. And Spielberg has never stopped defending that choice, calling it one of the most important of his career. Whoopi Goldberg wasn't just a surprise. She was a gift, one that showed Spielberg and the world that the brightest light can come from most unlikely place. Not through noise, not through polish, but through truth. Drew Barrymore, the child star Spielberg never stopped believing in. In E.T. the Extraterrestrial, there's a moment, small, quiet, where a little girl named Gertie kisses an alien on the nose and says goodbye. She's not acting. She's believing. And that's exactly why Steven Spielberg cast Drew Barrymore. Not because she could hit her marks or memorize lines, but because even at 6 years old, she brought something no one else could: pure, unfiltered wonder. When Drew auditioned for E.T., she didn't walk in pretending to be a character. She walked in pretending to be the drummer for a rock band. Spielberg watched her spin tales with wide eyes and fearless imagination, and he knew this wasn't a kid playing pretend. This was someone who lived in stories. She got the role on the spot. As Gertie, Drew didn't just steal scenes, she gave the film its heart. Spielberg once said he didn't direct her so much as follow her. She was spontaneous, emotional, magnetic, a child untouched by self-consciousness. And in a movie about the fragile magic of childhood, she became its beating heart. But Spielberg's connection to Barrymore didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. After E.T. made her a global phenomenon, Drew's real life took a difficult turn. She faced pressures no child should, the kind of fame that burns too hot, too fast. And through it all, Spielberg stayed. Not as a director, but as a guardian. A constant presence. A quiet supporter. He didn't give her advice through the press or lecture her from afar. He gave her love, consistency, and belief, even when the world wasn't sure what she'd become. Drew is often called Spielberg her godfather, but the relationship goes deeper than titles. He saw her not as a fallen star, but as an artist in progress. And decades later, when she rose again, stronger, self-made, and fiercely compassionate, Spielberg wasn't surprised. He knew all along, because to Steven Spielberg, Drew Barrymore wasn't just a child star. She was cinema's reminder that magic is real, and that sometimes the most powerful stories begin with someone who never learned how to stop believing. Robert Shaw, the force of nature Spielberg, tried to wrangle. Robert Shaw didn't just enter Jaws, he stormed into it. Gruff, poetic, intimidating, and entirely unpredictable, he brought to the role of Quint the same kind of energy he brought to life: intense, volatile, unforgettable. For Steven Spielberg, casting Shaw was like striking a match in a room full of gasoline, dangerous, exhilarating, and completely impossible to ignore. Spielberg was still a young director, barely in his late 20s, when Jaws went into production. He was helming what would become the first true summer blockbuster, and carrying that weight on a shoot plagued by technical disasters and mounting pressure. Into this chaos stepped Shaw, a veteran actor and playwright, as full of fire off-screen as he was on it. Quint, the shark hunter with eyes like harpoons and a voice soaked in sea salt and ghosts, wasn't just a character. He was a myth made flesh. And Shaw didn't play him, he became him. Grueling days at sea, long takes, real tension with co-stars. Spielberg later admitted that directing Shaw was like trying to tame a hurricane. And yet, he also said that Shaw delivered some of the greatest moments he had ever captured on film. There's one scene that says it all: the USS Indianapolis monologue. It wasn't originally in the script like that. Shaw, a gifted writer, helped craft it. He rewrote, rehearsed, refined, and when the cameras rolled, he gave Spielberg a performance so raw, so haunted that time itself seemed to stop. No shark, no music, no explosions. Just a man, a story, and a silence that stretched far beyond the screen. That scene transformed Jaws from thriller to tragedy. It gave the monster a human cost, and gave Spielberg his first taste of storytelling as legacy. Robert Shaw died just a few years later, but his impact never left Spielberg. He wasn't easy. He wasn't safe. But Spielberg knew, without Shaw, Jaws would have been a different film. Smaller, lighter, less real. Because sometimes greatness doesn't arrive politely. It crashes the boat, breaks the rules, and leaves behind something immortal. Before we go any further, did we miss someone you think belongs on this list? Or maybe there's a performance you feel Spielberg himself would place among his all-time favorites. Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. Conversations like that are what keep film history alive, personal, and always evolving. Now, as we reflect on these 10 remarkable artists, one thing becomes clear. Steven Spielberg doesn't just cast actors, he chooses collaborators. Partners in storytelling. People who bring not just skill, but soul. Whether it's the quiet conviction of Mark Rylance, the enduring humanity of Tom Hanks, or the raw unpredictability of Robert Shaw, each of these actors help shape not just a film, but a moment in time. A heartbeat of emotion, captured forever in Spielberg's lens. These aren't just roles. They're relationships, built on trust, mutual respect, and the kind of creative risk that can only come from deep belief in one another. Spielberg's legacy is not just the stories he tells, but the people he tells them with, the faces that make those stories unforgettable. So if you felt something watching these performances, if they've moved you, stayed with you, or even shaped your love for film, you're not alone. That's what great directors and great actors do together. They remind us of who we are, and sometimes who we could be. If this journey through Spielberg's favorite performers resonated with you, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps us bring you more thoughtful explorations like this, and it lets us know you're part of the conversation. Because in the end, film is about connection, and we're grateful to share that with you.